Well, today is probably the most asked about video I've ever got on my channel over the years. Today we're going to talk about my greenhouse. What we'll do is we'll start outside. So this is my greenhouse. Now, it's in the category that in the UK gets called a hobby greenhouse. Now what that means is a kind of standard size range that's common in a UK garden. So mine's is 6 foot wide by 8 foot long. Okay, now it is slightly higher than your average hobby greenhouse, and that's because this particular brand make their greenhouses like this. It's by a company called Rhino. So what we'll do then is I'll tell you all about how I use my greenhouse. We'll go from the use of it and why you might want one, what you might use it for. We'll look at the inside and how I've got it set up and why. We'll talk about all the gadgets and tools and things that are in there, and I'll try and answer some of the questions I've had over the years from you guys about my specifics. So let's start with using it then. It's a beautiful sunny day. It's quite windy, it's not overly warm, but that sunshine heats up the greenhouse. That's how it works. Any direct sunlight on there gets trapped inside, and it really does warm up that greenhouse. So it means for, say, early spring, I can actually be starting seeds and bringing on little seedlings much earlier than I could if I was doing it out in the garden. Because the greenhouse, not only on a sunny day will it warm up in there, but just generally it provides a bit of protection from frosts, from wind chill, from generally the cold that could damage or kill little plants. So it gives me that few weeks, maybe even a month or so more at the start of the season where I can get growing and get started, which is great if you live in a short season like I do. Now the other end of the spectrum is autumn, late autumn going into winter. Again, because it takes the heat from the sun, it can give me that extra few weeks at the end of the season where I can still be growing plants in my greenhouse that I would no longer be able to grow outdoors. So it extends my season, and that's how I use it. But although it does trap the heat from the sun, that heat will dissipate. It means at night it generally will be the same temperature in the greenhouse as it is out in my garden, which means in winter it can get down below zero in there. It still offers an element of protection though, so I do actually use my greenhouse all year round. And the way I do that is I think about following the seasons with the plants I grow. So I don't try and grow summer crops in there in winter, because although it helps to extend my season, it won't change it. It won't make it summer in there when it's winter out here. But it definitely does make it warmer and generally make things a bit better for the plants. So this is it. As I said, it's 6 foot wide and 8 foot long, so it's not incredibly big. But you'll learn how to make the most out of that space and how to make it really work for your garden. And that's actually the first question I want to talk about. Brilliant question, and I deliberately want to put this first because it was something I had never thought was a question that would be asked. It was something I always thought was really obvious. And it is when you use a greenhouse, but if you don't have one, this is one of the great questions that you want to ask yourself before you buy one. So it came in last year and I was asked, why do I see everyone online just using their greenhouse to start seeds? Why don't people actually grow plants in the greenhouse? Fantastic question, and here is the answer. My greenhouse is currently full of seedlings and small plants that cannot go into the garden yet, as well as some that are actually going out this week. But that is for now, and how I use my greenhouse now. So do you remember I mentioned stealing back some of the season or extending the season? Well, because it gets warmer in here, I can actually start seeds earlier and bring those seedlings on so that when they do go out into the garden, they're much stronger little plants and they've got a much better chance of surviving. And because they're slightly further on, I'm likely to get better harvests if they're food crops, or more blooms if it's some of my flowers. So that's one of the reasons you'll see people spending a lot of time with seedlings and baby plants and things in their greenhouse in the earlier part of their year. Now, I do grow plants in here. I just don't grow plants, or rather I don't grow the same plants all the time in here, or all year round. So what will happen is probably come May, when the last frosts have passed and my garden is beginning to warm up, I'll probably start putting some of these little plants into the garden, and it'll make space in here, and then things will change. And that's when I'll use my greenhouse for growing my warm season crops. Things like tomatoes, peppers, aubergines. Things that wouldn't be as successful for me in my garden, because we have a shorter season for those warm crops. And remember, the greenhouse lets me add on to that season. So that's how I do things. The start of the year, seedlings, seeds, getting things going, getting plants strong and healthy in a nice, safe environment. Later in the year, yes, then I will start growing proper plants in here. And it flips around again. Come the end of summer into autumn, I'll start sowing the seeds that are going to be my winter crops. And I said earlier, it's really important, I don't try and grow anything that isn't a winter crop for me. So everything I grow is hardy in my garden, but growing it in my greenhouse means that when we get to those extreme colds and freezes and it kills off my crops outdoors, I've still got things going in the greenhouse, so I can be harvesting all winter long. So let's start with this then. What you can see is the kind of shape and setup in here for what I'm doing. It is 3 benches. So there's one at the back and these 2. This is a kind of standard setup for a greenhouse, this U shape. These benches here in the UK, we call them staging. Okay, so if you're looking for things, that might be what they're called. But they allow you to have a surface that, for instance here, I can be working on when I'm sowing seeds and potting up seedlings, etc. It's a surface where you can be laying out all your different plants so they can get the best of the light, so you can get to things, you can see things. It's also somewhere where you can do things like this. This is a big heated propagator, and this lets me germinate seeds even when it's really cold, because it gives heat from the bottom, heats up the soil and lets those seeds germinate. It also gives a tiny bit of protection for anything in there that's a bit more tender. Now, this is my standard setup for most of the year. Any time when I'm growing smaller plants, I'm sowing seeds, that type of thing. For summer, however, I change it up. Could you remember I said I grow things like tomatoes and peppers? Well, tomatoes are really tall plants. So these benches can fold flat, and that's what I do. I fold this one down flat onto the floor, and that gives me the height I need to grow full-size tomatoes in my greenhouse. So this greenhouse very much gets changed around to suit what I'm doing and what I need. And that's one of the things you have to think about when you've only got a small greenhouse. If you can't change it up to make the best of what you want to do, it's going to limit what you can use it for. And I wasn't happy to be limited. So yeah, so that's roughly the setup. Now, in order to do that, there are a few little tools and gadgets and things that help me along. So let's talk about them, because some of them might be useful for you. They're not all necessary, but they're all useful for me. Let's start upwards. One of the things you'll see up here, this greenhouse has 2 windows in the roof. That is so important. We talked about how the greenhouse gets warm, and we want it to be warm, but we don't want it to get too warm, because some plants like peppers and tomatoes, if it's too warm, they won't produce, it's just too warm for them. But also, you want ventilation. If you don't have ventilation in your greenhouse, you're going to get problems with pests and mould and fungus and mildew and all sorts. You want ventilation, it is super important. So vents in the ceiling, but also I've got vents about knee level on each side of the greenhouse. So I've got an option for what I can open and when and what combination. But also, these 2 window vents at the top, they have something called an auto vent, which is one of my #1 gadgets for the greenhouse. It means I don't have to remember to come in and out and open and close windows. Instead, these are triggered by heat, so when the greenhouse gets to a certain temperature, These start to open, and the hotter it gets, the wider the windows open, which means there's automatic ventilation. Now, I've already mentioned that this is a heated propagator, so obviously that means that I've got some form of power in here. Quite often I get asked about heat for the greenhouse, and do you need to heat it? Do you need a heater? Do you need power? And the answer to all of them is absolutely not. Those are extras that you can add if you want to, but actually the majority of greenhouses have no heating in them. It's just not a done thing. Possibly because it would be so incredibly expensive to do. But you only need a heater in your greenhouse if you're growing something that needs to be kept at a set temperature and you need to have that really controlled environment. Things like, orchids, tropical plants, that kind of thing. Anyone who's really into growing that type of thing will not only have a heater, but they'll probably have all sorts of systems to monitor their greenhouse for humidity, heat, light, etc. as well. So it's a bit more outside the hobby range of things. So Eli, if you don't need heat and power and all that kind of thing, why have you got it? To be honest, it's just the convenience. It lets me run things like heat mats to heat up the soil, or this propagator, but it lets me charge camera equipment when I'm filming in the greenhouse. It lets me have music on if I'm in here working. All of those kind of handy things, and things like lights. Now, these are just outdoor lights, garden lights, but here in Scotland in autumn and winter and even early spring, it gets very dark very quickly and doesn't light up again until much later. So if I don't have some sort of light in here, it kind of makes it unusable. Now, these aren't anything fancy, but it lets me work in here really, really nicely. And again, it's because I've got power. You do get solar powered versions, and I have had solar powered lights in here, but now that I've got plugs, it just makes my life a bit easier. Now, it's not grow lights, it's just lights to see by. I've been asked as well about, do I use grow lights in my greenhouse? The answer is no, not as a habit, but yes, I have. A couple of years ago, I had all my plants in here, very, very early. I was sowing peppers in January in here, and I had grow lights on this for the little seedlings. Again, because it's dark here in Scotland, so we don't get enough light for our plants until mid to late March. So until then, I was running grow lights. So I get asked an awful lot about all the different tools and things I recommend for beginner greenhouse owners. The thing is, what I use in here is not really much different than what I would use if I was out in the garden or I had a potting shed, that type of thing. I won't go into detail because I've got a video that really does go into detail in this type of thing, and I'll link it at the end of the video for you. But I recommend things like some form of tray that you can use for potting up, just because it keeps things tidy. Some way of putting your trays of seedlings or pots on, like a tray like these, so that you can water them and it doesn't end up with water everywhere. Even things like little boxes that you can be storing plant pots and labels and that kind of thing in. Really handy. Shelves to keep things out of the way. So useful. And even things like plastic boxes. So this one's currently got my dahlias in it. I'm just about to get these planted up. But plastic boxes are awesome. Now, plastic. Here's the thing. A greenhouse is a humid environment. Okay, that's just the way it is. Here in Scotland, we have a very humid environment, so my greenhouse is always going to be humid. So cardboard boxes in here aren't great because they'll get damp and mouldy. Plastic boxes are fantastic. Now, speaking of plastic boxes, this is one of the most requested things about my greenhouse over the last couple of years, and it is incredibly simple, and I'm going to show you and you're going to be so disappointed about how simple it is, and it is these boxes here. So I said that I do a lot of seed starting and seedling potting on in this greenhouse. Therefore, it's just much more convenient for me and much cheaper for me to make up my own potting and seed starting mixes. So that's what these are. On this side, I've got all my ingredients. So I've got cocoa coir, I've got vermiculite, and I've got compost. And on this side, I've got my finished mix ready to get going. And you can see it's here because it's nice and convenient for where I'm potting on. Now these, I get asked about so much. So if I pull out this one, it'll make it easier to see. These are not fancy gardening boxes. These are recycling boxes from IKEA. Now what confuses people is they're actually white boxes, but you can see mine are all colourful. This started because we had them out in the garden and I actually spray painted them because the white in the garden was just too bright and stood out. And believe it or not, spray painting them this bright pink, they merged into the garden so much better. Possibly because we've got a lot of kind of rusty red colours in the garden. But I liked it so much that I brought them into the greenhouse to use because they're just so useful. And then I didn't have a lot of spray paint left, so I only spray painted the lid because it was the bit I could see. And actually I prefer that, I really like it. Now a friend made these fabulous labels for me for the first time I did this, using something called a Cricut. It's just a craft cutting machine. And since then I've been doing that for all my boxes. So I recently just updated these two because they needed a bit of a clean up because they were all, you'll see they get all scuffed and chipped and things from use. So I added the labels to these two just last week after I spray painted them. But yeah, these are my boxes that I use so that I can get to everything I need. And this is just a scoop, so I can get into the boxes and scoop out what I need. And it's great for measuring as well. Like I said, I make up my own mixes. Now, some of the other tools I use, you might be surprised at how simple it is, but there are tools I will have in the greenhouse all the time because I know I'm going to use them a lot in here and I don't want to have to go and get them from the shed and what have you. Two types of watering I keep in here. Just an old bottle, and it's got one of these little widgets so that it's a really super fine spray for seedlings, but you could do the same by just poking holes in the lid of the bottle. But also I keep a watering can with water in it in the greenhouse. The reason for that, I don't want to go and get water from the outside tap because it's going to be really cold and it'll shock all these little guys that are living in a warmer greenhouse. So I keep the watering can in here with water in it so that that is the same temperature as the greenhouse. It's the same with using a heated propagator. I keep a bottle like this in the propagator so the water's the same temperature, just so you don't shock your seedlings. So that's the real basic thing, watering. This is my potting on seed starting area, so I've got a lot of little things here that I use for that. Dibbers and widgers and things. For wiping my hands, because you get dirty and you're touching different things, so it's handy just to have a rag, towel, something. But you can see as well, this shelf here, that's actually just two pieces of wood. They're not even attached in any way, they just sit together. It just gives me a little place to put small things like pieces of string, wire, scissors, small things like that, and I can see it and get to it easily. None of this is essential, but it is really, really handy. Secateurs or pruners, because there will always be times when I'm pruning in here, especially in summer when I've got the tomato plants and pepper plants. So I keep my secateurs in the greenhouse, nice and handy. Now these two, you're maybe not expecting. A feather duster. Okay, I said earlier we'll talk about pests. This is because one of the pests you will get in your greenhouse, or at least I do here, is simply spiders. And I'm saying pest, it's not actually a pest in terms of the garden, but it's a pest for me because I end up with cobwebs everywhere and I end up walking into them, getting them in my hair, all that kind of thing. Feather duster. All I do is in that season when there's a lot of spiders about, is I just go round and break up all the webs every day just to try and encourage them to go elsewhere. Just head out into the garden and make your webs there. So feather duster is so handy, and if you can tape a bit of bamboo cane on it, it's nice and high for getting up there. There you go. The other one, I've got a little dustpan and brush I keep in here because when you're working away you will drop compost and potting mix and vermiculite and seeds all the time. And rather than just leaving them to sit and get into all the paving, sweep it up, and that way you don't end up with random plants growing in places you didn't want plants. It's also great for sweeping down shelves and things, because it's always good. Keep things neat and tidy. You will get less pests, less disease, less problems. Keep it tidy. Okay, the last thing I'm going to pop onto then is problems and pests. Now the thing is, a greenhouse will have its share of pests the same as the garden will. It's not immune from this kind of thing. For me, the main problem I have in my greenhouse is aphids. I grow peppers and aubergines, which just seem to attract aphids here. And being in the greenhouse, given it's a nice, safe, warm environment, they breed very quickly in here, so you need to stay on top of it. It's no different from being out in the garden, that you can just squish them when you see them, deal with them that way. The only difference is, given that you're in here and it's all glass and there may be ventilation, there are much less opportunities for those beneficial insects to come in and deal with problems like aphids. And on that note, there's also much less chance for things like your pollinators to come in here and pollinate any of your plants. So if you're growing things like peppers and aubergines, cucumbers, all of that kind of thing, you may end up having to pollinate by hand because there's just not enough pollinators about. So other than if you've been eagle-eyed enough to spot it, there is various tripods and camera stands and things all over my greenhouse for filming. There are other things I have in here, but I wouldn't consider them to be something that's really a big deal for a beginner greenhouse grower. Stick with your simple plant pots, some trays and the basics. And as you get used to using your greenhouse, you'll learn what you need and what might be handy, and you can slowly build things up from there. But there you go, that's my greenhouse, how I use it and what's in it. And as I promised then, a video all about making the best of even a small greenhouse and hand pollinating your plants. See you folks.